Okay, hi everybody. Thanks very much for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at MedCommsNetworking.com, which provide resources, services, information for people who work in and around the global MedComms community, by which I mean medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and indeed for people who want to come into the business, writing, account management, whatever. I run a service at FirstMedCommsJob.com where you'll find lots of resources specifically for you, careers guides, events, videos, and so on. Today we're running a Zoom meeting with Jo and Jess from Parexel. We've got an opportunity to find out and to hear about that company, what MedComms means to them, what the work they do, and the sort of people they're looking for, and training opportunities, and so on. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jo to lead us through a presentation, which will be followed by a Q&A. Thank you very much, Jo, and over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Hello, everyone. My name's Jo Fetterman, and we also have Jess from, we're both from Parexel. And today we'd like to take you through a series of slides where we will outline the work that we do at Parexel within MedComms. And then we'll move the presentation onto some more specific details about ourselves. And then we'll open up the meeting to questions from you. So now I will share my screen. Please let me know when you can see my slides. Perfect, thank you. So today we'll talk through some of the activities that we will perform at Parexel, specifically related to medical communications. Today there'll be Jess and myself. Jess is a scientific team lead at Parexel, and I'm a senior scientific specialist. Parexel is a large global contract research organisation, and within MedComms, we at Parexel, we have several offices around the world. And you can see here in this slide, we have two offices based in the UK, Littlehampton and Uxbridge. We have an office in New Jersey, Hackensack in the US. We also have a MedComms office in Bangalore in India. And more recently, we've opened 2 offices in China, in Beijing and Shanghai. And these offices operate individuals from within medical communications. They're either office-based or they operate out of those offices. But in terms of the actual company, we comprise a wide range of individuals with certain expertise that we can draw on and work with within medical communications. And one of the main advantages of having such a global setup in our business is the fact that when we work on specific projects, we can take advantage of the different time zones so that we can meet these very strict timelines that we often need to work with by utilising the time zones across the world. This slide here just gives you a very top line overview of the medical communications offerings that we will get involved with as scientific writers at Parexel. We are really quite well known for our publication activities, and you can see here, for example, we often get involved with the development of congress activities such as abstracts and poster presentations or presentations, manuscript development, publication planning with our clients, and a vast array of other publication activities. We also report and support various meetings held by our clients and authors. These can either be investigator meetings, steering committee meetings, that sort of thing. And we will often support those meetings by facilitating the actual meetings, developing and presenting the slides at the meetings, and also generating the reports that come out of those meetings that will then lead on to other activities that we will get involved with our clients. And this is just an example of a wide range of different activities that we will offer through medical communications at Parexel. This slide illustrates just the top line of the wide range of publication planning experience of over 25 years that we have at Parexel. You can see here a very varied disease therapeutic areas that we have been involved with, going back to the 90s right up to the present. And you can see that we need individuals within medical communications that have experience in a wide range of therapy areas, which allows them to bring their background knowledge and expertise into the publication planning, which supports the clients as they want to publish their usually clinical data in these disease areas. Our clients usually comprise, or historically comprise, big pharma, large and small pharmaceutical companies. And more recently, we have been working with small biotech companies or startup companies where they are beginning to want to leverage their data into the wider community. And we certainly do a lot of work with those companies as well. Here we're trying to illustrate to you the fact that we do regard ourselves as offering medical writing expertise and excellence within the MedComms department. Often our scientists, the vast majority of them, have advanced degrees, and we want to enable that vast experience to deliver projects to a very high quality, which will often need to formulate very strict timelines in order to deliver those particular outputs. So we really do rely on the experience that we have within MedComms to support our clients. And we also deliver these activities through ethical means, for example, good publication practice that we work with very closely when we're undertaking publication items for our clients. This slide illustrates the publications innovations that we've undertaken within Parexel. Many of you may be aware of the International Society for Medical Publication Professionals, that's ISMAP. Since 2007, Parexel has been undertaking a wide range of publication innovations that we've presented at ISMAP. We've got some examples here of the various different formats that we've been involved with over those preceding years, and that we continue to work in those areas moving forward. Within the scientific services at Medical Communications, we have over approximately 60 scientists, of which we have scientific writers, team leads, and strategy advisors. And the vast majority of these individuals will have PhDs and postdoc experiences, but not all. And a lot of our MedCom scientists are also published authors themselves. And there are exceptions, but usually people that join medical communications at Parexel usually come from a scientific or clinical research background, either through an academic institution or through industry. And many also have medical communications background as well. So we do look for individuals that have that type of background because we know that they will be able to bring the offerings that we're looking for within MedComms at Parexel. The typical tasks, I would say that if you were to join MedComms at Parexel, and I can probably go into a little bit more detail later, especially in the Q&A, but we will often undertake medical and scientific research topics, often clinically based, and we look to generate interpretation of data to a very high standard with a high degree of accuracy. And we fold all of that information into the scientific messagings from which the clients will want to convey as they develop their molecules through the life cycle of their molecules. So the typical task would be working very closely with clients, with authors, and within our actual MedComms team in order to deliver those outputs. And I've said previously as well that these will often be under the tight time constraints that we work towards in order to deliver timely products. So this slide gives you a structure of the team within MedComms. We have a scientific director, a scientific strategy advisor, as well as the, various scientific team leads. And from the team leads, they would support specific senior scientific specialists like myself, scientific specialists and scientific writers. And again, for the purposes of today's meeting, we can talk specifically about the scientific specialist, senior specialist and scientific writer roles a little bit later on in the slide presentation. And again, we've got the type of individual roles that we have within MedComms. This is a typical account team. Left-hand half of the slide really illustrates the account management side of the MedCom teams, starting with the account director, manager, senior program specialist, and the program coordinator. But for the purposes of today's meeting, we're going to focus on the right-hand side of the slide, where we will see more detail on the scientific team lead role, which is Jess's role as scientific strategy advisor that we would often work very closely with, senior scientific specialist, which is my position, as well as a scientific specialist and scientific writer. But we also have other important key roles within a typical account management account team at MedComms, like editorial specialists, for example. Another key aspect of working at MedComms within Parexel is the vast array of training options available to us, and it's I think this is quite important, and this is something that Jess and I will certainly talk to more later on, and certainly in the Q&A, because I've definitely benefited from the training offerings that MedCom have, that Parexel have within MedComms. And there are either instructor-led training modules that you can attend, and these are extremely helpful for example, if you want to learn more about report writing or your presentation skills using PowerPoint, Excel. There's a whole vast array. There's probably too many for me to mention here today, but they are really really important and really beneficial, especially as a new writer when you join Parexel. There are also on-the-job training opportunities as well, which we can certainly discuss in more detail. So the next slide is really outlining Jess's background. So Jess, can I hand over to you to talk through this slide?
Yeah, so Jessica Beishon, I've 17 years of experience in medical communications at Parexel. As Jo's touched on, the scientific team lead role is to oversee scientific teams, and I have a global team. I work closely with my colleagues in the US and in China as well as the UK. I have really enjoyed my time at Parexel. I've been on a journey since I've been at Parexel, and that I've had a family. I've had a flexibility around that, so I've had a very good work-life balance. I do like to go into the office. I do work from home sometimes as well, which is quite convenient. And overall, very positive experience. You'll see on my biography there that I'm also a governor at a secondary school, which I've put on there because it's important to recognise all the wider skills that we can bring into our job roles, you know, not just exactly within your current job, but for example, expert learning strategies. We talk a lot about that in terms of how to engage young people, and some of those learning strategies I can bring into my work as well. So I'm happy to expand on any particular area in the Q&A. So I'll hand back to Jo to talk about her biography.
Thanks, Jess. So this is my slide, and I'll just go through this in a little bit of detail because it might help just get a flavour of where I've come from before joining Parexel. So you can see here that I have a degree in biological sciences from Manchester Metropolitan University, and also have a PhD in medicine from St Bart's Medical School in London. Following this, I undertook 2 postdoc positions, one at Great Ormond Street Hospital here in London, and another position at Vanderbilt University in Nashville in Tennessee in the US. I came back to the UK and decided to join industry at that point, where I then became a senior pharmacologist at UCB, based in Slough in the UK. And it was at this point when I started my own family. And at UCB, I was often running experiments. I was in the lab. I was teaching students and supervising other members of the team, and it was quite clear that work-life balance was becoming difficult, especially with a young family. And it was at this point where I decided to explore other options outside of the lab. And since I had published my own academic research, a colleague of mine suggested looking into medical communications, and he actually recommended Parexel. And that started the thought processes in my mind as to it sounds like a really good option to go into. But I definitely had questions of my own before joining Parexel. For example, how would you actually publish in an area that you've never worked on? For example, that was really puzzling to me. And another question I had to myself was, why would other scientists want another company to publish for them? It seemed counterintuitive. When you're in academia, for example, you really push to publish your own papers. So this was curious to me as to what was involved in medical communications. So it was at that point in 2015 I decided to apply for a scientific writer role at Parexel, and that was when I joined MedComms. And the main activities that that I was involved with at that point was very much along the publication idea. So I was heavily involved in helping to publish abstracts and posters and manuscripts, interpret scientific and clinical data on behalf of the client, and really building strong working relationships with clients and with authors, and really trying to get a good understanding of what the clients are offering in their messaging, as well as the actual disease therapeutic area. And during that time, obviously, I undertook a lot of the training that was offered and had really deep, detailed discussions with Jess, who's my line manager, to talk about career progression. And it was at that point in 2017 I was promoted to a scientific specialist role, which changed really how I operated to be much more autonomous as a scientist. So I, at that point, became the recognised go-to person from the clients and the authors on the therapy area that that I'm working in. And I really developed a deep and in-depth knowledge of the therapy area and the client's products. And then at the end of last year, I was fortunate enough to be promoted again to a senior scientific specialist role. And it was really, now that I'm a senior, I'm now able to consolidate all those experience that I've gained as a writer and as a specialist, as well as providing mentorship and other training skills to other members of the team, and now embarking on more deep strategic thinking for the client. So that's a little bit about me, and certainly please, we can go into more detail later in the Q&A session. And this is the final slide that Jess and I would like to share with you as a way of a thank you, but also to give you some contact details to anybody who might be interested in joining Parexel, and perhaps looking for vacancies. We have email addresses here for Lee and Michelle, and they're the contact people that you can certainly contact if you have any more thoughts. So thank you, and I'll hand back over to Peter.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jo. Thanks. That was great. And can you just lose those slides, and we'll run the Q&A with just the video showing. Excellent. Okay. So thank you very much. And that was a great introduction to Parexel and an insight into what work you do. Could I just say to the audience that are currently online at the moment, at the bottom of your screens, just a reminder, you've got a chat button and a Q&A button, both of which will call up text boxes, and you can just send in your observations, your comments, your questions that way, please. And we will see them at this end, and we'll weave those into the conversation. So please, the idea for the next 10 minutes or so is to be led by you guys with your questions. Couple of questions. Maybe if I can just start a little bit, and sorry if I missed something you said, but let me just clarify a little bit. So I think it's interesting listening to you guys talking. Your job titles are different to the sort of job titles you often find in MedComms agencies. It's maybe worth making that point. You're talking about scientific specialists and so on, rather than medical writers, associate medical writers and so on. So it's one of the points I just wanted to make, and I quite like this, sort of, the fact that you're talking about slightly different things. If people are watching this and looking about MedComms, it's really important to understand that agencies are different. And what I like about the sorts of meetings we're doing is we're allowing you to talk about your own structures and so on. So please, everybody, understand it's worth having a look around at the different sort of agencies and understanding what the talk is. Also, a big difference for you really is you've got, and I don't think you said very much about this, so just maybe touch on it a little bit, is you're part of a big CRO, clinical research organisation, which makes you quite different to quite a number of the other MedComms type agencies. Now, I don't want to get too bogged down in it, but I'm assuming that you have writers who specialise on the clinical regulatory side, writers who specialise on the MedComms side, and they are different, aren't they? And I know we're talking about MedComms today, but I just want to acknowledge the fact that there is that bigger organisation and different sorts of writing going on in there. Can you just say a few words maybe about what maybe, writers in MedComms maybe makes a writer in MedComms as opposed to makes a writer in regulatory? Just talk a little bit about that different part of the business, because the context I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point you raised there, Peter, and sometimes it can cause a bit of confusion. We distinguish partly. That's the rationale for using the slightly different terms. So scientific specialist, the specialist versus a writer, that you might find in other agencies, to try and distinguish us within Parexel as well, because we are part of this big wider community. And a scientific writer within Parexel, a medical scientific writer, will specialise more on this side of, for example, writing up, regulatory documents, which has a very little interpretation or evaluation. So writing up data from clinical study report, writing the protocol and so on. So it's a different function and a different role to what we have in medical communication. So that partly explains why we have the different terminology in the job titles as well. If you'd like to add to that, Jo?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Jess, because really, traditionally, I would say a medical writer would be those types of individuals that would develop the clinical trial reports. I know there are exceptions to that, but I think we want to make ourselves distinct by describing ourselves as scientific writers or scientific specialists, because we are undertaking very much different activities than that. And one of the slides earlier, we demonstrated the different variety of offerings that we can give as a scientific writer. And I think it's the leveraging the scientific background that we have that makes us strong individuals to undertake the types of roles that we have at Parexel. So it's having that strong scientific background that I think helps with the job titles, because it does make it a distinct role, I would say.
Okay, and again, we have to be a bit careful. I'm seeing some of the questions. There's quite a few questions coming in actually, and some of them are getting a bit specific. We'll have to be a little bit careful. We don't sort of get too bogged down in particular points here. We want to talk about the generals, I suppose, generalizations a little bit. But when someone says to me, "I want to be a medical writer," I mean, the first question I ask is, "Do you mean regulatory or MedComms, or indeed other sort?" And it's the sort of thing we just need to make that message. They're different sorts. But also, someone's asked somewhere down here about HEOR as a specialist form of writing again. The specific question is, do you deal with HEOR market access? I guess the answer is yes, basically, at your end, yeah. So again, these sorts of terms, people need to research this and understand that, it's very, it's quite difficult, because there's what we're talking about is something that can be lots of different things to lots of different people. Mm-hmm. But there are some broad differences between something like the regulatory and the MedComms side, and to understand that is quite important. Yeah? There's a number of questions coming in about qualifications and so on. Let's just try and pick up on this a little bit. I think one of the things, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said in your slides 80% of the medical writers or scientific specialists are PhD qualified. And so just touch on this a little bit, because it's a common question. Do I need a PhD? How important is it? Postdoc experience, Do you take BSc? Do you take postgrad? Just give us a bit of a flavour of what people need to be seen by you, and then how useful is it to have those postgraduate qualifications? Can you just talk a bit about that?
I mean, generally we do look for higher degrees to illustrate that sort of deep scientific understanding, and to have that experience of really understanding what research means. But it is not exclusive. You know, not everybody has a higher degree. Occasionally we have people that don't have science degrees. You know, they might have an English degree that have transitioned into the scientific arena. So the most important thing is your ability to take the science and to be able to communicate that in a insightful way, and the tailoring it to the audience that you're addressing it to. So it's not just about being a very deep, having a deep understanding of the science. It's about how you communicate that. So I think that's a very important aspect of being successful in medical communication. So it's not necessarily about the higher degree that you have. Okay,
that's interesting. Can I just clarify one point there? Because as a generalization, I think we would say that you probably need a life science degree to get into MedComms. But am I understanding that, you know, in principle, you would accept not a life science degree? You're talking about English qualification.
I mean, it's unusual. Don't get me wrong.
Right, okay.
It's not the norm that you'd have somebody coming that route, but we do have an example of that.
Okay,
yes.
Okay. So I just think that's an important point, possibly, that we expect the life science degree basically behind you. Postgraduate helps a lot. One question certainly, I think might be the second question about the same sort of idea. If you've got that the PhD postdoc experience, you know, if you go on a bit too far, too many years, you know, does that hinder you coming into MedComms? Or do you just, you know, is it not like that? Is more experience good, basically?
If I start by answering that question, actually, because I'm probably a good example of that, because I actually had 2 postdoc positions and a number of years in industry before I joined Parexel in MedComms, and it certainly wasn't a hindrance for me. It's definitely a benefit because, for example, because I'd worked in industry, I already had that understanding of drug discovery. And so I was certainly able to use that coming into a scientific writer role at Parexel. It's definitely not a hindrance, and I would counter that to say it's a huge benefit. To be perfectly honest.
Having said which, again, a number of questions are coming on the same topic about, well, you know, if we've got lots of experience, we're basically paid quite a lot of money. You know, how much am I going to get paid when I come in here? Is it fair to say that that effectively, however much experience you've got, you're still going to come in at an entry-level route? Entry-level, by definition, is not going to be well paid, by definition. However, one of the things I always say about MedComms and the agencies and so on is that there's a degree of negotiation. You know, a lot of companies, it's not like bands. You don't go from band D to band B or whatever it is. There's some negotiation, but at the end of the day, people have to understand they are sort of starting in a new profession. So the salaries are sort of going to go that way. However, it's then not capped. So if you put the effort in and you do well and it all works out, you can move quite quickly up through the ranks. So I'm seeing Jess sort of nodding at me. I'm just trying to summarize, but is that a fair generalization?
Yeah.
It's a bit difficult to get more specific than that, perhaps, but you're happy with what
I think that's exactly it, Peter. I think it might seem like it's a step back, but it's a completely different environment. It's probably much more commercial than what you're used to, and it's a very important there's a very wide set of skills actually that you have to develop. It's not just about science and communicating. There's a huge amount of other elements to the role in terms of I mean, time management, project management, the budget side of things. Teamwork is absolutely crucial. You know, how you can get on with teams. So there's a whole range of different skill sets that you need. And being a good scientist and understanding science is not enough in the first instance to say that you're extremely qualified in the role. But I definitely echo what Peter says, that you can quite rapidly progress. Your career can very rapidly progress if this is the right role for you and it's a good fit, and you know we work well together. Then there's good potential for rapid career development.
Okay, and the writing sort of experience. I mean, you know, I do talk to quite a few people who go, well, I've published X numbers of papers. I am a very good writer, sort of thing. And I think again, it's worth making the point, which I guess you have, that what we're talking about is not necessarily the sort of writing you've already done. And part of this is training you to be the sort of writer we need in MedComms, which is in part being able to write for different audiences and so on and so forth. Yeah. But again, some of the questions that come in here, again, there's a lot of questions, sorry guys, but some of the questions have come in talking about training for people without writing experience. And somebody somewhere said, you know, how can I get in without any experience? I mean, the point is there are entry-level opportunities that if it's an entry-level opportunity, you don't expect that person to be a medical writer in your terms. And so you're looking for inclination and ability and the basic ability to put a sentence together and to communicate. Yeah. So the writing tests and so on that are used, and I guess you would use, you don't expect someone to pass as a medical writer. You're expecting someone to understand what's going on, communicate the message, and write sensibly. Yeah. And then the training, which you touched on, Jo, is very good across MedComms these days, and it's got very, very, very good. And I know you have particularly good training at your end. So I think in that, again, I've summarized, I think, several questions and answers there, but hopefully it gives people the confidence. You know, we are talking about entry-level roles, you know, but if a company like Parexel wants experienced people, which you do, then that's different sort of thing. Yeah. But the point is there are entry-level roles. You can come in at an entry level and you get the training. But what they're definitely looking for, what you're definitely looking for, is the aptitude and interest and so on. Again, am I summarizing appropriately here?
Yes, you are.
Everyone's just nodding at me, which is great.
No, I agree, because I remember when I first joined Parexel and I was asked to do the writing test. Bearing in mind, I had published before, but I had no experience in medical communications before. Part of the test was to take a paper, I think it was from the Lancet, and it was in a field just I knew nothing of. I think it was cardiovascular disease or something like that. And the test was to write an abstract based on the key findings from this particular paper. I think they needed you to spend a specific amount of time doing that, and then you submit that in. And then they would reply back to you with a percentage assessment of whether you'd covered the key aspects that they were looking for. And that was an example of a test that I had to undertake before I got the interview. So it's kind of what you were saying already, Peter. It's to demonstrate an aptitude to a piece of work, feeding on your experience that you have, even though it might not be medical communications, but it's taking that experience and applying it in a given situation that can demonstrate to the interviewer at Parexel that you are somebody that they're looking for.
Yeah, and I'm very fond of saying, and I hope I'm right, one day I'll be caught out, that in my experience anyway, that the agencies aren't trying to catch people out.
No.
You don't tend to play games with people in the way that some industries do. So the point is that if you're asked to do a writing test, the brief is probably going to tell you what you need. And to sit and read that and understand it, maybe ask a question if you've got a question, but they're not trying to catch you out. So if, for instance, if they ask you to summarize a paper and write 900 words for a nurse, you know, don't write 2,000 words for the top opinion leader because you want to show how clever you are, sort of thing. So answer the brief, because that's part of what we do, and that's part of what you're looking for. Yeah, but I think it's, you know, relatively speaking, straightforward, the process. But you're very fussy. Can I put it like that? There's a lot of people going for the jobs, and again, people need to understand it's a very competitive business to get into. So anything that people can do, people have asked about what can put on our CV and things like this. You know, if you've got writing experience, if you've been involved in societies, things like that, you're looking for evidence of communication skills and so on. Yeah, and all that will help. Yeah. One particular question I just wanted to ask: is it useful to have a medical degree?
I mean, it's always useful, obviously, to have the clinical understanding. It's not essential, of course. You know, most of our writers come from a general research environment. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of what we do about, you know, when we're writing about obviously treating diseases, then clinical understanding is very helpful.
But if a medic, there seems to be a couple of medics trying to get into this business, are they going to come in as a medical writer like everybody else? Are they somehow treated differently because they are a medic? Are there different roles for medics because of their clinical experience, either within Parexel or the broader MedComms business? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on their aptitude, really. And again, it comes down to how well they can communicate, how well they can scientifically communicate, and that's not necessarily connected to whether you're medic or not. So within the wider Parexel organisation, we have medical professions in all sorts of different roles. Specifically within MedCom, it comes down to aptitude. I mean, if they may be quite strategically thinking, commercially thinking, there's a line of development that they can go in that direction. So it's not specifically, I'd say, about being a medic. Jo, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I mean, we do have examples of scientific writers that have medical degrees that we work with in MedComms. So it's not common, but we do have people that we work with that are medics, definitely. There's one person in particular which I'm unfamiliar with how he actually started into MedComms from his background, but it could be something that if anybody's actually interested after the meeting today and want to learn more about that, we can certainly find out for you, definitely.
Okay. And again, we seem to have sparked a number of questions about different qualifications. Pharmacists, for instance. I mean, again, pharmacy is a good background to have. I guess the point I'm trying to get to is simply that there are a number of different backgrounds, and the right background in the right place can be very advantageous, or it can make no difference. Because if a company happens to be in a position where that's just really great because it fits great with the team, you happen to be this sort of person or that sort of person. But it's not quite. It certainly would be misleading to say, if you're a medic, you're going to come in at, I don't know, twice the salary or a senior position just because you're a medic. You're sort of going to come in as a medical writer and go through the ranks like everybody else. But that encompasses a number of different scenarios, so it's a bit difficult to be more specific than that. Yeah.
And also, just to add to that, Peter, I think you might have touched on it earlier. The salary is a band,
yeah.
And so when you enter, if you're offered the role, you can certainly negotiate your salary within that band as an entry level. So it's there are options there. It's not. I know we say it's an entry level, but certainly the salary doesn't necessarily reflect that, because based on your experience and what you're bringing to the role, you can certainly negotiate this salary accordingly.
Yeah. Having said which, I think just to reiterate once again, to make it absolutely clear what we said before, both all of us, I think, you are sort of starting a new business and you have to sort of like understand there's risk and so on all sides. So, you're probably going to come in lower than, than some people would like anyway. But if you prove yourself, the opportunity is potential. And that's before you get into freelancing. Again, we're getting questions coming in about freelancing. Let's not get into freelancing other than to say that freelancing is a booming community. A lot of people who come into MedComms as writers at some point go on to freelance work. There's all sorts of opportunities there in freelance now to work all over the world. Just as a slightly allied to that question, and perhaps just to round things off for this part of the session, in terms of working from home, remote working, there's presumably lots of flexible working going on, and more and more. I mean, we're talking in the middle of the crisis. Let's not get bogged down in the crisis, but we are talking in May 2020. So there's a lot of home working going on, but there's always been a lot of home working, and your company has been quite active in encouraging that in the past. Is that a fair point?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a differentiating factor possibly for our company, that we've been working some time with a lot of staff decentralised. We truly are global teams. So you may be on a team, with people, somebody's sitting in the US, somebody's sitting in China. And whilst you may be affiliated to a local office, there's decentralised working for sure.
Okay. And specific. So let's just cover off one final point, which covers again another question. At an entry level, we're talking in a slightly unusual circumstance at the moment where people are working at home, and so companies like yours are taking on board entry level and having to onboard at an entry level stage. But again, just to sort of like as a quick summary, and maybe you've got a comment about it, but generally it's a good thing if things were normal and we were able to go into an office, but the entry level people in particular work in an office because they get they see what's going on, they get the training and so on. So that's important, isn't it? I mean, we might be finding ways around that at the moment, but I think it's important that people understand that, you know, it's again, it's about more than just sitting and writing a manuscript. You have to be part of the process and the team and all the rest of it. Yeah. So maybe that's all we should say on that one just at the moment. Yeah. I'm very aware we have got a lot of questions. I've probably flicked over quite a lot of them too quickly, but I've got one eye on the clock because I do try and keep this sort of recording to this sort of length. We're probably slightly over. So can I, on that note, can I wrap up the sort of recorded part of this session and say a huge thanks to Jo and Jess for coming in and talking to us about Parexel. I know you're very happy to have people contact you afterwards. And Jess, Jo, in the slides you had a couple of names. I'm sorry, it was Lee and it was somebody in the States.
Michelle.
Michelle, okay.
Lee Gray and Michelle Coulson, that's right.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, cool. So there's a couple of email addresses there. There's a website at parexel.com, I guess. And you'd be happy to hear from people if they want to contact you. So I think that was really useful. It was interesting. I appreciate you coming online and talking. But for the purpose of this recording, I'm going to ask you to give a little wave and say thank you as I hit the stop button. Okay, so thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.